I think reaching out to somebody that helps you really identify what you want, who you want, walk you through truly planning it, that onboarding and integration, training, coaching, because again, that's why your associate leaves.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Raving Patients podcast. First thing I want to do is remind everybody about our sponsors, both the Doc Sites and Dental Intelligence. Thank you for their support. And also to remind you about my upcoming event in September in Delray Beach, Florida, called Supercharge Your Dental Practice. Check out superchargeyourdentalpractice.com to learn more about this great event coming up September 29th and 30th, 2023 at the Opal Grand Resort in Delray Beach, Florida. So today's episode is entitled, How Using a Practice Transitions Coach Can Optimize Your Results. My guest is Kathy Lamont. So Kathy Lamont is a passionate dental coach with almost 4 decades of clinical business experience. Kathy is able to leverage her experience in managing and coaching both private and DSO practices to optimize her clients' practice transition outcomes. So again, we're talking about practice transitions today, and welcome to the Raving Patients podcast, Kathy Lamont.
Hi, it's great that everyone's here listening to this. It's a very, very important topic, so I'm excited that I'm going to be able to share that with you.
And they may be watching it too because it is on YouTube. So they're listening and watching. So Kathy, there are a lot of people nowadays who, as, practice becomes more difficult, staffing becomes more difficult, patients become more difficult. They looked to transition out of an ownership, maybe go to an associate position like I did for a year, or they're looking to just flat out retire. So I think the first thing I want to talk to you about is how a practice or how a dentist should prepare to sell his practice. I know there are a lot of things to do, but how does someone prepare to do it? And how far in advance should you be doing it as well?
Well, I think the second you start thinking about a retirement strategy, that it's time to talk to somebody about how to set it up. So I don't think it's ever too early. I think as soon as you begin that process of, hey, 2 years from now, 1 year, 10 years, I want to make a plan for that transition, and talking to somebody that can tell you, how to make the process smooth and get the most, out of your practice. I don't sell practices. I just work in conjunction with their broker, and, to help them just avoid all of those pitfalls and sinkholes that come along the way, and really, stop the process, slow it down, make it much more difficult and more costly.
So what are some steps other than getting a broker, other than, getting a coach if they want one like yourself? What are some things a dentist needs to do in order to, prepare to sell a practice? Obviously you think about it, once you make that decision, like you said, it could be a year, 5 years, 10 years. Mine was a 5-year plan. It's a funny story. We were on the beach in November of 2019 and, in Delray Beach, actually, where my sister and brother-in-law lived. And we literally on the beach said, hey, I think in about 5 years, I want to move to Florida. And that 5-year plan became a less than a year plan when COVID hit. Yeah. And so, like I said, I think I did things very quickly, but literally what are some things a dentist needs to do to actually get the practice ready for a sale?
Yeah, I think first you've got to look at your systems and protocols. I think as dentists, progress, they kind of get this trajectory like a bell curve, and then they kind of level off and plateau, and they often just start going down and not paying attention to those systems and protocols, because they're thinking about being done. They don't want to invest. But that is the biggest mistake I see, is they don't invest in that systems and protocols, making sure the practice is really running like a well-oiled machine, because there's nothing worse than trying to go through this process with a chaotic office environment and try to sell your practice at that time. So I think, having those, that is one of the things to do. Just looking at your technology. I think it's your practice is more valuable if you're up to date on your technology. Really looking at your team. Who do you have in place? And preparing them for that. I know dentists are often, I don't want to tell them, I don't want my practice, my patients to know, my team to leave. I think there is a big mistake in doing that. I think preparing your team as you, solidify your plans a little bit more, and your patients, that open communication can make the transition for yourself, and your team and the new practicing doctor that's going to be taking over ownership. So I think those are the really big things that to look at is getting your practice in order, keeping your technology up.
What about from a financial perspective? Because of the vast number of analysis from a financial perspective that they're going to do, preparing financially from the practice perspective, not the personal side of things, but from a sales perspective, I don't want to say cooking the books. That's not what I'm saying here, but there's things you need to be doing just because of the way they analyze the financial part of the practice that you should be doing as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, you definitely have to start working with your accountants on how you're going to strategize. I mean, again, it's never too early to get those things in place so that you can maximize your practice sale. There's things that doctors don't think about, taxes and and all of a sudden this $1 million practice sale is now, we're significantly less, and they're often scratching their heads. I was really planning on this practice sale for really funding a lot of my retirement. So, understanding those implications of taxing and getting your practice, for a personal perspective, obviously, but from a practice perspective, it's again the same thing. You want to talk to someone who's evaluating practices, get that practice valuation early, because there are things that they may recommend that you do to be look more fiscally sound. And I think that I won't say that I'm an expert on any of this, but I like to partner with people that really understand that part of getting your practice financially ready so that you get the most out of it.
Yeah, you mentioned taxes, and even though I was told how much taxes I had to pay, it actually was a significant amount more because I earned money as a W-2 employee as well. And so I owed a lot more than I expected it last year, and that was a shock to the system. Not that I retired, I'm still working, but I know some people don't want to work after they're done and have no way of overcoming that potentially. So yes, there's definitely have to prepare from the financial aspect as well. I'm curious from your experience. You mentioned getting your technology in order. What about getting the practice's online presence in order? How much do you think that plays a role in how a practice looks online? I'm a review guy, so I always think that if you have a practice that doesn't look very good online, especially from a review perspective, you're going to really lose interest from potential buyers. But do you really think a practice is worth more if they have a better online presence?
Absolutely. I mean, reviews are everything today, and that drives your new patient flow, which, a lot of times practices don't realize they've got this patient attrition going on. And, using something like Dental Intel as well to really track that and know, I'm getting lots of new patients. Well, how many are walking out the back door? So understanding that, is a very, very important thing to know. And your practice is going to be much more valuable if you're gaining patients instead of losing patients. And you won't know that unless you really dig in and do some identifying or use a software like Dental Intel that can help you with that data. But that is wildly important. The more reviews, the positive reviews, again, a practice is worth more. Because obviously if a practice is now dwindled down to 400 patients, I've recently worked with a doctor in that scenario, it was a great deal for him, but it's a lot more work, right? So that's a very important if you want to get the highest dollar, is to keep up with technology, keep up with the social media and your reviews.
Got it. And I agree with everything you said there. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So we talked about what we need to do to prepare to sell a practice. What are some of the problems that you see with practice transitions from your experience?
Yeah, I've had some very interesting ones, so I know what you don't want them to feel like. Oftentimes there's a lot of unrealistic expectations from the selling doctor, and they're very emotionally attached. And I see that to be one of the biggest things is, getting prepared emotionally for this sale, and so that you don't go into lockdown mode and you're still hanging on and you want the new doctor to do everything like you. They're not. And you just really need to temper that. And I think a coach can help you get in the right mindset and be prepared for that transition to happen. And the second thing is, the biggest thing is the team. They don't prepare the team. And, this selling doctors had plenty of time to prepare, but the team is often not told until the day of closing. And, there's lots of, different emotions, fear, anger. There's people crying. It's really not a good way to start off as a new business owner. And, the team starts to be resentful, and the patients, when they don't know in advance of the doctor. They felt like something happened, and they felt like they had a better relationship with the doctor than they feel like they did. And it's a tough thing for everybody, and including the patients. And I'll see a lot of practices where if that's not done right, the patients, leave. And I guess the selling doctor doesn't necessarily care at that point, but it's a really tough transition for everyone. And so that's what I see as some of the biggest things, the staff attrition after that, and the patient attrition. So getting that communication right for the selling doctor as well, really exiting in the right way and helping drive that message and supporting that doctor is going to emotionally make them feel a lot better as well with it.
God, it was interesting because I was not leaving the practice. I know some people flat out, they, a very short transition, if anything, and they retire. I stayed on for over a year after I sold the practice, and I retired in December after selling in October the previous year. And it was funny because our intention, because it was the associate, was to tell them literally right like the day before the sale, just to keep things on the down low. And although they knew something was happening, because I was living in Florida. I mean, when I moved to Florida, they said, it was only a matter of time before I was selling the practice. And but I remember that a week before the sale was to take place, the girl who does the ordering in the practice said, can I order all these things? I'm saying, why don't you hold off on that? Because I knew, and they were like, why would he say that? And they literally called me downstairs and said, are you selling the practice? And so I kind of had to tell him at that point. But that was my own fault because of the way I reacted to buying something there. No, I think I agree 100% that you have to handle it appropriately. If you don't tell the team, they will be resentful. There's a lot of emotional baggage going on there. I'm not so concerned about the patients per se, because you're really not going to tell the patients until the sale actually occurs, in my opinion. But I agree with everything you said there. I'm curious. Talk to the audience, because when we spoke, I was a little surprised that there exists a coach who does what you do. So how can using someone like yourself alleviate problems related to the sale of the practice? So talk to the audience about what you do, or what role you take, how you help the dentist in terms of this practice transition that's taking place.
What I do is I come in and I really work with the selling doctor on evaluating their practice. What's your practice readiness? And I kind of do an assessment with them and walk them through everything from, their staffing to their, standard operating procedures, their handbook, and, their technology, where they are with their social media presence. And, after that, we can really craft a great plan for, what they need to do to get their systems and protocols, their team, their social media, and really spend time and effort growing that. And so that's kind of the first step of things, is just doing that evaluation and then making a plan on how we're going to do that transition. And so from a communication standpoint, spend a lot of time on communication, helping them craft that letter they're going to send to the patient afterwards. It's so important to do that well, and to exit with a positive way for the community, your patients, and yourself. Getting that down, how you're going to talk to the team about it, when you're going to talk to them. I recently had a client that was selling a practice for a second practice that he had, and he introduced them to the new owner about 2 weeks before the transition. And so they were able to work through their emotions. They actually went to the practice where the doctor was working currently, spent half a day with him, and they felt really good about the transition. And he felt really good about it. The selling doctor, just felt really good, because he felt that was really taking care of his team. He didn't lose anyone in that transition. And again, I think that makes it more valuable for everyone when you are engaged at that level with that. So that's kind of all the pre-work I do. I do, offer to help the buying doctor as well when they're coming in to make that transition, on the other end. So I like to, kind of run my service through the whole thing if possible. I think it's a imperative they get the practice going on the right foot, because, ultimately they want to change a lot of things. But so that's kind of what I do in the beginning there, is to really work them through that assessment and help them make their plan to be the most valuable.
Do you work with them after the sale, or that's when the coaching stops? I mean, look, some people don't realize, like I had a lot of emotions told to me. They said, "Hey, Len, when you sell, you're going to, have some regrets that you didn't do things." I was told by people that when I retire, I'm going to miss dentistry. Honestly, I'm very honest about this. I haven't missed it at all. I was ready to leave. So do you work with them after the sale at all, or once the sale takes place, your job is done per se?
Yeah. I mean, I think for, if they're exiting the practice, I think we're done at that point. The professional relationship is over. But there's a lot of dentists that, like yourself, choose to stay on as an associate in the practice, or they do a, transitional buyout, over several years, with an associate that becomes kind of a transitional partner, then co-owner and onto, full ownership. And in that case, I work with them, again, as an associate and helping them deal with that, because it's not easy to go from being the primary doctor to the emotions of, how do you, build the confidence in the patients to see the new owner, and, how are you going to deal with that? And how are you going to, work with that doctor when you're, what you think should happen in a treatment plan isn't happening for patients that you've had for, sometimes 3-4 decades. So that's a kind of a part where I stay on through a transition, and work with the owner and the buyer.
Gotcha. A lot of times the first step in the process of transition is actually bringing on an associate. A lot of times it's not someone you're not selling to a DSO, which you're just, one day you're working, one day you're not. You're literally planning it a couple years in advance and saying, okay, I'm going to bring an associate, and there'll be an associate first, then there'll be a partner, then they'll buy me out. So I'm assuming that you work with them as far back as saying, hey, I have a 5-year plan. I want to bring an associate in to work in the practice. I'm assuming you assist them with that as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that is the first step. And that is really the first problem that happens when you're thinking about making that transition, is there's very little thought and planning going on with, what do I really want this associate for? And can my practice support it? Because, I see doctors say, yeah, I want to start cutting down, so I'm going to cut my days down. And then they hire an associate and they're like, oh my gosh, I want everything. I'm going to continue to work. And I'm like, what are you doing? You said you wanted to work less. And the practice really can't support 2 full-time associates and dentists. And so you'll see that associate move on because there's not enough patients and there's not enough treatment, and they're not getting the experience and the mentorship they need. And that's where that revolving door comes in. So, you have a great plan that I work with doctors on, that transitional partnership, for an associate and how that works. And it's really planning in advance of everything so that there's nothing left to the details of, well, a year from now, we'll figure it out. Well, that rarely works. And from what I've seen with my, past experiences, that, there's often, anger on both sides of how things are going, and ultimately ending in that relationship.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I had 2 associates. One I brought in 2017, and she told me that she had 3 years with me. She was going back to Texas, and in June of 2020 during COVID, she left. I then had to work a month and a half from, in July and part of August. And I brought my associate in August of 2020. And then with no intention at that time to buy the practice. And then over time, she gained confidence and really proved herself to be a really good dentist, and decided in June of 2021 that she wanted to purchase the practice because she knew it was up for sale, and she may lose her job if I had sold it to someone else. But it's definitely, just from experience, for those that are listening out there too, it is so much easier to sell to an associate. It's such a smoother transition. The girls already knew who she was. They had worked with her for well over a year. They became friends with her. And that's a tricky situation anyway, going from a friendly relationship as the associate to the boss relationship as the owner of the practice. But no, it was, there's so many ups and downs and twists and turns when you have, stuff like this going on. So it's really interesting to know that there's someone there. So talk about the new owner transition, into, like the associate position, buys your practice. There has to be like I just said, there's a transition from being the associate to then becoming the owner of the practice. So I'm assuming that you offer services for that as well. As you start with the owner selling, and then you work with the associate who's buying to transition them into ownership as well.
Right. Yeah, because even if they've been an associate in the practice, there's still a big learning curve as to taking over, becoming that leader, that boss that has to make decisions. And oftentimes I see that they've been in that friend zone, and now, they give in to everything because they feel like, they don't want to upset someone. And so really helping them gain their confidence, their communication, and, setting the systems and protocols up like they want, and, how to make those transitions, because change is hard. And so even if you are the associate in the practice, you're been transitioned to partner and then owner, it's still a difficult road. And that first year is really imperative that you hit the ground running. You don't lose your team members, and you build the practice like you want, so that at the end of a year, you're not just so frustrated, you're throwing your hands up and then you're spinning your wheels, and you haven't been as productive. So I find when, I can engage with them at that first level, they quickly ramp up in their productivity and production, and, just a much happier first year.
What else do you think is important that we let the viewing audience know, as well as the listening audience know, about what you do, so they are aware that, hey, this is important, that when you get to that point in your life that you're ready to sell, you need to reach out to a coach? Because like I said, I'm not sure that this is a well-known, hey, there's a coach that helps you with this. There's a practice broker, there's a bank, but you don't necessarily know there's a practice coach who comes out there and is able to assist you during these troubling times, potentially.
Well, where I found that out myself is I worked with a DSO for about 5 years. And then I went into small groups, dentist-owned groups. And what I found was, as we were purchasing practices, and that was what was really lacking in the market. So I kind of developed a system based on what I was doing with these small dentist-owned groups. And I didn't know of anyone that was doing it either. And I said, well, this is, something that is really needed. And I saw the difference in the transitions when, I was able to prepare everyone for it. And so I just think that's what's missing. And I don't think there's too many people out there. I'm sure there's a lot of people that can help you if you're a coach. But I think really specializing in that has a big advantage for people to reach out to someone that's got experience with those transitions and understands, what happens well, what needs work. And, it's hard for dentists to wrap their minds around paying for this. They're like, I can't, coaching stuff for them all anyway. But, well, I'm going to sell my practice. I don't need anybody to fix it. I just want to sell it. Well, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes they'll ever make is doing that. So starting from the time they're with an associate, I think reaching out to somebody that helps you really identify what you want, who you want, walk you through truly planning it, that onboarding and integration, training, coaching, because again, that's why your associate leaves, because it's chaotic. No one's training them. The team's resentful, and then starting there with your transition. So that's really why they need to reach out to a coach as early as possible, to start with them with that first time you're thinking about making a transition to bringing on an associate, then into selling, and maybe staying on as an associate yourself.
Got it. And then one last thing I had before we transition to the Q&A part of it. How long do you think is a reasonable time for a seller to stay on if they are, I stayed on for a year, a little over a year. Is there a specific time that you see? When I was growing up, my dad was a dentist, and I went to a lot of dental meetings, and it was always that, the ideal transition is you bring a guy on, he buys the practice then, but you only introduce him as the associate, then over time becomes partner, then over time he becomes the owner. So it's a smoother transition. But nowadays, some owners literally, they sell and they literally leave that day. So is there a better mix or a better concept that's out there? What do you think works well? What do you think doesn't work well?
I've seen it go well both ways, but, honestly, it's a tougher transition sometimes when the selling doctor stays on, because there's that dynamic of patients and team not really trusting the new owner because the older doc is still there. And so there's that emotional bond with them. So it can sometimes be a tougher transition to have the doctor stay on. If it's communicated well, I think an easy parting is great. But I think staying on at least 6 months, if you're going to stay on in that capacity, so that you run through one cycle of recall patients is important. But it really just depends on the relationship and really being honest with the buyer and seller, saying, hey, what do you really want out of this? And are you going to be happy exiting at this point? And then if we're not happy with this relationship, either side, what's the exit strategy? So that again, there's not all this emotion attached with maybe things that aren't working out. So I don't think there's a magic bullet. I think it depends on the relationships and the personalities of the doctors.
All right, that sounds great. So I want to transition to a different section now. It's a lightning round Q&A. I'm going to ask you some business questions, very quick answers, and then we'll wrap up. We'll ask for your contact information, etc. Okay. So, what mindsets have helped make you successful?
Just an open mindset, being open to learning new concepts, being in a positive mindset. Things don't go well in dental offices. So that's been the big thing for me, is that positive, open mindset to embrace new things.
Okay. Who has been your greatest inspiration?
My greatest inspiration was my father. He was my first mentor, taught me everything I knew about sales and relationships, professional relationships. So that was really been the biggest mentor in my life.
That's great. My dad was my mentor too. So when you were a kid, what was the first thing you wanted to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a brain surgeon. So I ended up being a dental hygienist. I always told everyone I got in the same region, but a lot less schooling. So I always thought for some reason I wanted to be a brain surgeon.
Okay. What books have you read multiple times that you recommend everyone to read at least once?
I love something. It's a really small little book called The Little Yellow Book of Yes, and it's a Jeffrey Gitomer. He's a sales guru, but it is great for teams. It's great. You can just read it multiple times. You're always going to get these great nuggets that give you that positive yes attitude that we all need to wake up with every day.
That's great. How do you capture and keep track of ideas? Do you keep a notebook? Do you have voice memos? Do you have a journal?
Yeah, I do a lot of voice. I'm much better at recording and going back and listening and transcribing from there. So yeah, I'm a big, I'm that generation. I like to talk on the phone. So yeah, I like to record.
Okay. What have you learned from the most successful person you know?
I learned a lot from one of my mentors, Dr. Dean Stratman, and I worked with him at coming back to a DSO that he had started. And I learned a lot about business, about, transitioning DSOs, and a lot about private practice. So he was really instrumental in building the next phase of my career.
Got it. I'm curious your answer to this one. What profession do you think is the most undervalued today?
I think teachers, and I know that's kind of a standard answer, but I see so much not happening with the youth today and how they're being, trained to come into the workforce. And I feel like, teachers are those first people outside of your immediate family that have that big influence and that can really have an impact on, where the youth of today go.
Got it. Last question. How do you define success?
I think success is, being happy, and, wherever that is, with you, if you need to, have titles, if you need to have money, but being happy every day, waking up, doing something you love, that's success.
Perfect. Great answers. You do really well there. Thank you. So Kathy, as we wrap the podcast up, any final words, and then how can people find out more about your services?
Yeah, I just hoping everyone's got an open mind, taking that mindset to that there is a different way, maybe a better way to grow your practice, transition it, have a work optional lifestyle that really feels great to everyone. So I really hope you have learned something today and can take that away and maybe do things a little bit differently.
And then how can people learn more about you and then contact you if they have any questions regarding your services? You
can always reach me at my email. It's real simple. It's just info@kathylamont.com. And my webpage, same thing. It's just kathylamont.com for my web. And so I am doing a boot camp coming up here on the 13th. It's a transitional partnership boot camp, and it kind of really introduces that concept of, starting that transition with an associate into, potentially being into a retirement strategy. So that's coming up and it's on LinkedIn, and it's, I can send you that link, Dr. Tao, if you'd like, and you can put that on the podcast.
Okay, perfect. This was great. Thank you so much. You were an awesome guest. Guys, if you like this episode, please tell your colleagues. If you know any of your colleagues that are looking to transition out, obviously give them this. This is a very vital episode for them to listen to. Tell other friends. We can review us, like us, download it, subscribe to our episodes. It's really important for me. I want to again thank our sponsors, both Dental Intelligence and the doc sites, for their support, allowing me to do this as much as I do. Don't forget about my events, superchargerdentalpractice.com. You can save $100 by using the code RAVING for raving patients, but the code RAVING if you have interest in joining that. And as I always end these podcasts, remember, your reputation matters. Until the next episode, Kathy, thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll talk to everyone soon.